Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, found footage movies have scared audiences across the world with their realistic and raw footage style. I recently watched a movie while on vacation called The Outwaters. After I finished watching the movie, I had a ton of insights. I think the movie is super original and unique. The movie also displays a lot of the limitations, though, that are commonly found in the found footage genre. Now, I know I'm not in my studio, okay, but I wanted to get outside and try something different, I don't know, I just want to get outside. It's really dark up in my office, so I thought I'd get outside, and try out some, outdoor shots, which hopefully they look okay, and hopefully it sounds okay. But in this video, I want to dive into the Outwaters, and I want to take a look at why found footage films have the limitations that they do, and how this movie specifically kind of encapsulates and shows all of these different limitations, while also being really interesting and really unique and cool. My name is Matt, and this is Understanding Cinema. Now, I recommend you come back to this video after you've watched the movie, okay? But just in case you're too lazy, let me do a quick recap for you. Spoilers, obviously. The Outwaters begins with a distressing 911 call.
911, what are you reporting?
And visuals indicating that the main characters Robbie, Angela, Scott, and Michelle have gone missing. The subsequent footage is retrieved from 3 memory cards discovered in the Mojave Desert. Robbie is a hopeful filmmaker who recruits his brother Scott and his friend Angela to help film a new music video for Michelle in the desert. They encounter several strange events, including earthquakes, animal noises, and a naked man wielding an axe. And as the movie progresses, the friends are attacked by fleshy worm-like creatures, and Robbie is repeatedly transported to different locations, including a pool of red water, his mother's house, and the wing of a plane. After what seems like days of an acid trip-like nightmare, Robbie ultimately finds the decomposing heads of his friends impaled on pikes and mutilates himself. The film concludes with a shot of Robbie, reaching for the sky, fatally wounded. Found footage horror films are some of my most personal favorite types of horror when executed well. I think they have some of the highest potentials of any film type in the horror genre. But unfortunately, it seems to me that a lot of found footage movies tend to fall into a couple problems. I've split them up into 4 categories. The first being the limitations of the format, the lack of character development, the overuse of jump scares, and the inability to explore the horror. And what I really enjoyed about The Outwaters is not only does it suffer from a lot of these problems, but it also learns and supersedes a lot of these problems throughout many points in the film. There are some scenes that I would deem perfect executions of the found footage genre. The found footage format is limiting by its very nature. It relies on the illusion of real footage to create fear and suspense in the audience. And a lot of the time, the way that this footage impacts us is left up to the staging or the editing. One of the main issues with found footage horror films is that they often follow a similar formula. It tends to begin with a group of people setting out to document something, whether it be a paranormal entity or even recording a music video. As the footage progresses, strange things begin to happen, and the group becomes increasingly panicked and frightened. Eventually, the situation spirals out of control, and the group is either killed off or barely escapes with their lives. This formula has become so overused that it can be easy for audiences to predict what will happen next. The shaky camera work, jump scares, and sudden loud noises have all become cliches of the genre, and as a result, these types of films can feel formulaic and repetitive. Additionally, the found footage format can limit the storytelling possibilities. Because the footage is supposed to be real, the filmmakers are often limited in what they can show on screen. This can make it difficult to create complex visual effects or depict supernatural elements in a believable way. As a result, many found footage horror films rely on off-screen scares or ambiguous endings, which can leave the audience feeling unsatisfied. Found footage horror films often prioritize the scares over the characters. Because the style relies so heavily on the footage being found, there's oftentimes little room for character development or backstory. The focus is on the immediate horror rather than the characters experiencing it. This can make it difficult for the audience to care about the characters, and can lead to a lack of emotional investment in the film. The characters in these movies are often thinly drawn and one-dimensional, and audiences may struggle to connect with them or care about their fates. This lack of character development can be particularly problematic in found footage horror films, as the genre often relies on the audience's emotional investment in the characters to build the tension and suspense. If the audience doesn't care about the characters, the scare and horror elements may fall flat. Because the footage is supposed to be real, there may be limited opportunities to show the characters outside of the context of the horror situation. This can make it challenging to create complex character arcs or explore the characters' motivations and backstories. Throughout the films, the characters are little more than cannon fodder for the horror elements, and their fates feel largely inconsequential. This lack of emotional investment in the characters can make it difficult for the audience to fully engage with the horror of the situation. In the Outwaters, the characters Robbie, Scott, Angela, and Michelle are all fairly one-dimensional. Robbie is the filmmaker here, so we spend the most time with him, and yet by the end of the film, we hardly know much about him other than his relationship with his brother and mom. Most of the scenes where we should have got to know him and his friends are spent with the group endlessly rambling about meaningless things that serve no purpose to the plot or characters. For example, in the scene when Robbie is recording his friend Michelle singing, the shot holds on her singing, as well as her reactions to hearing her voice, for way too long. This could have been a useful scene if we learned some decent information about Michelle or Robbie, but no. We just have to sit and listen as they slightly adjust the vocal equalizer with nothing but little comments from Michelle. There are so many more scenes just like this that seem purely to fill up screen time. Another example is when the group stop at a small lake. Robbie films himself at the lake practically in silence. He doesn't say anything worthwhile or interesting to the audience, just him chilling at the lake in an unbelievably long take. These scenes would be perfect places to add simple lines of character building or even story elements, and yet they don't.
Jump scares are a staple of the horror genre. Did I spook you? Sorry. But they oftentimes are overused, especially in the found footage genre. Because of the style, the footage tends to be in a more raw and less edited format, but it can be tempting for a lot of filmmakers to rely on these jump scares to create cheap thrills. And this can oftentimes lead to a predictable and repetitive film that relies on these cheap jump scares rather than real terror.
Jump scares are sudden, startling moments that are designed to make the audience jump out of their seats. While they can be an effective tool for building tension and suspense, they can also become very quickly overused and predictable, ultimately diminishing their impact. Found footage horror films are particularly susceptible to overusing jump scares, as the shaky camera work and limited point of view can make it challenging to build tension and suspense through other means. As a result, many films in the genre rely almost entirely on jump scares to generate a sense of horror. Relying too heavily on jump scares can lead to a sense of predictability and repetitiveness, as the audience begins to anticipate when the next jump scare will occur. This can ultimately undermine the effectiveness of the horror and make the film feel formulaic. These jump scares are often accompanied by loud, jarring music cues that telegraph the scares in advance, making them feel less impactful. In the Outwaters, the best example of this are the worm creatures in the desert that terrorize Robbie. In practically every scene they are in, they are accompanied by an extremely loud screeching that is pretty terrifying on the first sighting, but after the fourth or fifth, it gets really repetitive and starts to feel a bit tacky.
Found footage films often leave the horror unexplored. Because the footage is meant to be raw and unedited, there's little room for exploration of the supernatural elements that often drive the horror. This often leaves a lot of unanswered questions. It can leave the audience with a feeling of incompleteness.
The audience is left with little understanding of what exactly is happening and why, which can leave them feeling unsatisfied. Because the format is supposed to be real, there may be limited opportunities to show the audience the full extent of the horror. Found footage horror films often prioritize the authenticity of the footage over the horror elements, which can also further limit the exploration of the horror. The filmmakers may be more focused on creating a believable scenario rather than exploring the full extent of the horror that the characters are experiencing. For example, I think the scene that most aptly shows the lack of horror in the Outwaters is the scene where Robbie finds himself right next to what seems to be a big creature. Now, the only reason I can infer that it is a creature is purely from the heavy breathing, but not from anything that's seen on camera. My problem with this scene and many of the other scenes throughout this film is that the flashlight used to explore the darkness is literally the size of a pinhole. When pointed directly at the monster, we can't see any discernible feature that would lead us to believe it was some kind of monster. If I watched the film without any sound, I would have no idea what was happening throughout half of this movie. And honestly, that's the film's biggest weakness. While found footage indie horror films can be incredibly effective in creating scares, they also have their limitations. The format can be limited. The jump scares can be overused. The characters can be underdeveloped. And oftentimes, the horror is left unexplored. Yet despite all of these limitations, found footage still finds a way to be extremely entertaining and really, really fun to watch. At least for me. Now I want to talk about a lot of things that I really, really liked about this movie. I think the movie is extremely brave, and I have to give props to the director, Robbie, for creating what is very clearly a passionate film. While I might have some gripes about the flashlight or some of the pacing problems, this film tried so many unique things, and a lot of them really stuck with me. The first thing that I really connected with was the visuals. Now, I went to school for cinematography, and have always connected first and foremost with how a film looks. And The Outwaters has some of the most breathtaking and visceral visual imagery that I've seen in a while. The first thing that stood out to me was its use of bright strobes and the color red. The two best examples of this are the portals that Robbie finds himself flying through every 10 minutes or so, and the pool of red liquid. Both of these scenes made me feel much like Robbie did, in a trance. As I sat watching, I could feel myself being hypnotized by some of the visuals on screen. I think my favorite shot is this one. Now, I'm about 95% sure that this shot is literally just a paper towel roll being rotated in front of a camera with light at the end of it, and yet I was absolutely blown away at how haunting of a visual it is. Another thing that I think a lot of people complain about, that I think this film does a really good job integrating, is the way the camera is used. What I mean specifically is why Robbie holds on to it for so long. As a fellow filmmaker, I, alongside many others, have a unique desire to capture things on camera. But even I would probably set it down if an eldritch horror started to infect my mind and make me start deleting my friends. It isn't explicitly said why, but I think you can pick it up through the quiet rambling utterances of Robbie while this cosmic creature is destroying his sanity. After he is taken through the portals and left in the desert, Robbie is left alone and helpless. He is clearly not okay and is losing himself more and more each hour. Some of the things he says to himself are,
"Who am I? I'm Robbie."
While lost mentally, he is trying to hold on to the only thing he has left, his identity. I think that him holding the camera throughout the film is not only symbolic, but a literal representation of Robbie holding on to what he is known to be him. He is a filmmaker. Even after having his sanity destroyed, he holds on to himself, and us as the audience, to the bitter end. The Outwaters builds its suspense gradually, akin to the Blair Witch Project, but with the added benefit of high-definition imagery and the harsh desert sun. The camera's limitations at night and its limited flash range obscure much of what the characters see, but as the story progresses, the third memory card is revealed. What was once a slow-burn tale of atmosphere transforms into a Lovecraftian nightmare, where even less is visible than before. The Outwaters compels us to confront haunting sounds that can only be the result of violent carnage. As the film progresses, disbelief may arise regarding the character's decision to continue filming amidst such atrocities, or why the camera lens remains clear while its wielder is covered in blood. But if one can suspend their disbelief, they will find themselves in a deeply unsettling visual experience. The Outwaters deserves to be experienced with minimal foreknowledge. Beautiful moments throughout the film are inextricably linked to scenes of savage brutality, leaving much to the viewer's imagination. Robbie Banfitch deliberately obscures the practical effects, often forcing the audience to visualize the monsters based on mere glimpses of a bloody mouth or a writhing tail. Salam Belladonna's eerie musical score complements the film's unrelenting tension, culminating in the suggestion of genuine horror. Although the events of the movie remain somewhat unclear, one's interpretation of the story is sure to differ from the other. Nonetheless, the final 10 minutes of The Outwaters are amongst the most gruesome and discomforting moments in any horror film to date. Anyways, thanks for sticking around to the end. I know this video is a bit different from the last ones I've done, because I'm not up in my office, but I thought I would try something different. So if you guys enjoyed this kind of style, let me know. I know the Outwaters is not for everybody, but if you like found footage, go watch the movie, come back. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought about this movie. I'm really curious as to what a lot of your guys' thoughts about this movie are gonna be. Be sure to leave a like, and if you like videos like this, I highly recommend you go check out my last video I did on Parasite. The video took me like 2 weeks to make. It would really mean a lot if you guys went and check that one out too. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. My name is Matt, and this is Understanding Cinema. Peace!